I want to offer the following reflection before we begin our evening together. The darkness so long on the horizon had arrived. At the point of a gun, and with his son crying in the background, the man was dragged off to a prison camp, unsure of what the future might hold. He'd been a successful lawyer, his wife a homemaker, the young family making their way in the upper middle class. Somehow, sometime later, his wife got him out of the prison camp, and they fled to Europe, to England, to find refuge from the violence and threat in their homeland. That young family could have been any of the young families that we see in images from Europe today, walking along railroad tracks, waiting at border fences, desperately waving their papers. But that family isn't from today's headlines. That family was mine. My grandfather, grandmother, and uncle, who by some miracle got out of Nazi Germany to arrive as refugees in England, refugees with nothing. As we all know too well, they were the lucky ones to find refuge in still civilized, if not entirely welcoming, Great Britain. Today, Europe is once again overrun by refugees and migrants fleeing all manner of horror. Thankfully, organizations like IsraAID is taking seriously the biblical call to welcome the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Tonight, we are honored to host this program, to learn what is being done and what else we might do to ensure that the refugees of today find the safe haven that my grandparents were blessed to find over 70 years ago.
Thank you very much to AJC Westchester Fairfield and especially Bruce Rubin for putting this event together. I'm thrilled to be here on behalf of AJC's Jacob Blaustein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights. JBI, as we call it, specializes in identifying the globally agreed upon state obligations and analyzing whether or not states are in fact living up to those obligations. In many situations, especially like the European refugee crisis. As the crisis continues, we're concerned that refugees are being rejected rather than protected. With the dramatic image of 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi washed up on a Turkish shore, the global scene was shocked and demanded a response. The European refugee crisis is the worst refugee crisis since World War II, a fact that many have been saying since it began. This is not the worst refugee crisis the world has seen. However, the dimensions of this crisis are unparalleled in recent times. The combination of insufficient reception, processing, and integration features available for the refugees are destabilizing Europe and the Middle East. AJC and its Jacob Blaustein Institute are doing numerous things to address this crisis, including contributing to on-the-ground efforts by IsraAID, mobilizing political support throughout the EU, and in the United States, actively participating in aid decisions by the Jewish Coalition for Syrian Refugees. To give you a fuller view of the crisis, the International Organization on Migration estimates that in 2015, over 1 million refugees crossed the border into Europe, many of whom through the Mediterranean. They also report that this year, so far, 150,000 estimated have arrived in Europe and continuing at a rate of about 2,000 each day in Greece. This is about 7 times the rate that they had been arriving in 2015 in this exact same period. There are just under 900,000 applications for asylum by Syrians in the European Union currently. That ranges from April 2011 to today, and thousands more come from non-Syrians. These numbers are only increasing, and the United Nations has estimated that at least 1 million more refugees will enter Europe this year, and the European Commission has an even higher estimate at 1.5 million. This journey to Europe, as we've seen and heard from many reports, is a perilous one. This year, already 455 attempted to reach the shores and didn't make the journey. Since 2014, an estimated 7,500 have perished on their way to Europe, many of whom through sinking boats, in cargo ships, in trucks, many of other tragic stories that we've heard. My fellow panelists can tell you more about their on-the-ground experience, but even for those who do make it successfully to Europe, conditions are far from welcoming. There are under-resourced reception centers and concerns of increasing sexual abuse in camps, and about 750,000 refugee children out of schools, about 142,000 children having been born while in exile. The refugee crisis that's ongoing in Europe is a part of a larger global refugee crisis. Currently, there are about 60 million refugees or internally displaced people throughout the world, 10 million of which came from last year alone. The current refugee crisis in Europe we often refer to as the Syrian Refugee Crisis. In fact, about 50% of the refugees in Europe are Syrian, while the other 50% come from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Nigeria, Iraq, other places like that. There also is a great deal of focus about the refugees being young, strong men, when in fact the majority of refugees are female. In November 2015, about 75% of the refugees in Europe were counted as women or children below the age of 17. I just want to make a quick side note about the distinction between refugees and migrants, because I'm sure that you've heard these terms used interchangeably when in fact there is an important difference. A refugee is a protected individual under the 1951 Convention on Protection of Refugees that both the European Union member states and the United States are parties to. It says that a refugee is anyone who's left their home country due to a fear of persecution based on their race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or social group. As a result of being designated a refugee, you can't be sent home to your home country for fear of your life and well-being. Migrants, on the other hand, are individuals who have left their home countries for other reasons, and these can be better economic prospects, more job opportunities, flight from natural disaster, oppressive regimes, persecution that doesn't fall within those protected grounds. As the crisis has gone on, many have asked, why is this happening now? And the short answer is, it's not just happening now. It's only come to public attention more recently when in fact Europe has seen an increase in refugees since the beginning of 2013. The photograph I mentioned earlier of the 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi on the Turkish beach went viral over the summer, and that was what really drew many people's attention to the actual refugee crisis. In fact, ongoing conflict in Syria, tonight marking the 5th anniversary of the Syrian conflict, ongoing repressive regimes in other countries have all contributed to the influx of refugees in Europe. The media very strongly focuses on the influx of refugees in Europe, when in fact there's also a great deal of refugees that remain in the region around Syria. Syria currently has about 4.8 million refugees and 7 to 8 million internally displaced people. Over 2.5 million refugees are registered in Turkey, about 1 million in Lebanon, and a little over 600,000 in Jordan. These countries in the surrounding areas of Syria are very saturated with refugees to the point that Lebanon's population has shifted to 25% refugee, and in Jordan it is 10% refugee. Compare that for a moment to Europe, which has been receiving the bulk of the attention. The amount of refugees that have come into Europe from the beginning of the crisis comprise less than 1% of the entire population of Europe. Those who have fled Syria and left from their main country to countries in the region often had been waiting out the end of the Syrian conflict. There were hopes of returning to Syria once the conflict had resolved and resuming their lives as usual. Many of them have since fled those countries to Europe due to several push factors. Many have cited lack of education for their children because in the camps there are no schools. In addition, a lot of the neighboring countries to Syria have laws that prohibit refugees from working, meaning that those who are in the refugee camps have no sources of income and unfortunately have had to resort to sending their children to work and occasionally marrying their children young. In 2015, 87 to 93% of the refugees in Lebanon were counted as impoverished. And so the flows began into Europe, and as winter came, there was concern about whether or not this flow would stay or, with harsh conditions, if it would slow down. But as it turned out, despite harsher conditions and even harsher political climates in Europe, the refugee flow maintained at exactly the same pace. As I said, there have been extremely difficult political circumstances in Europe, in addition to the harsh winter and other obstacles that the refugees have faced. Within Europe, there's been as pretty wide a spectrum as can be in the political responses. We've seen Chancellor Merkel in Germany open the doors to the country and welcome refugees with open policies and welcoming those who were seeking resettlement. Despite the political backlash she's received from it, Chancellor Merkel has held by her stance on welcoming refugees, even though her opposition party, which is opposing immigration, is gaining political ground. Conversely, other leaders such as Viktor Orban in Hungary have responded with anti-immigrant propaganda, fence construction, border closures, and suspension of train travel, keeping refugees trapped or prolonging their journeys to safety. Poland, Slovakia, and other countries have expressed interest in only receiving Christian refugees, a proposition that is neither legal nor was well received. Intermittent border closures in Serbia, Croatia, Macedonia, and other countries throughout Europe have only added additional difficulty and contributed to casualties amongst the refugee population in Europe. The European Commission has been strongly working to try to resettle these refugees as best as possible. There was a plan that was put in place last year to resettle 120,000 refugees, at the time 1/5 of the refugees who had arrived in Europe at that time. And that plan, while it did pass, was met with a great deal of negative sentiment, particularly from Eastern Europe. There's currently another European plan that's in the works with Turkey that is proposing to take a group of refugees in the European Union and bring them to Turkey in exchange for greater funding to Turkey, an expedited process for Turks to travel to Europe without visas, and sped up talks of membership within the EU. This plan is extremely controversial, most importantly because of the fact that any refugee designation of status is determined on an individual basis, and collectively taking groups and moving them to other countries, particularly without ensuring that they'll receive refugee protection, is in direct contradiction with the 1951 Refugee Convention, as well as other applicable laws. Last year, as many of you may know, Secretary Kerry had announced that the United States would be receiving and resettling 10,000 Syrian refugees. And the plan was for that to occur before the end of the fiscal year, which ends in September. Currently, the United States has settled about 10% of that commitment 5 months into the year. And the plan further stated that the United States would increase its overall refugee resettlement to 85,000 this year and 100,000 next year. However, there's not been an additional designation of those spots for Syrian refugees. Prior to last year, the United States had only resettled 1,500 Syrian refugees since 2011. Many political figures within the human rights field, the United Nations, and others have spoken out about the need to accept refugees and provide them the protection that they deserve, including the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN Secretary General, and Pope Francis on his most recent visit to the United States. While these Syrian refugees and other refugees are all due protections, there are security concerns to consider. Since the refugee crisis has become a major news item, we've seen a lot of backlash to it and a lot of speculation about the risks that an influx of this size can pose. These concerns are not unfounded, but there's a great deal to be known about the process that is often shielded from the public, which is that, particularly in the United States, with the refugee resettlement program, there are numerous layers of background and security checks that an individual must pass before admission. There have been recommendations of additional security checks and even suspension of the entire refugee resettlement program. But in fact, the security clearance is so severe already that there are individuals who have been in process for several years awaiting their determination. There have also been major events that we've seen tragedies, including the Paris attacks. These have led to a lot of speculation about the refugee population. And while absolutely every refugee should be screened and ensured that they do not pose a threat, we must all be careful not to paint the entire group with a broad brush. Which brings us to, what can we do? What can we do about this? We've heard a lot about what's going on and the significant size of this problem, but what can we do? As I said, this problem is not going away. This is something that is going to continue for the foreseeable future, and we need to ensure that we're doing what we can to resettle refugees and allow them the safety that they're owed. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has been underfunded for several years in their pleas to aid the most dire needed refugees, with half of their appeals going unfunded last year. This was an increase from the 37% of unfunded appeals the previous year. Yours and contributions from anyone else to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees helps to aid those refugees that are designated as the most in need, and those contributions cannot be undervalued. Other relief organizations, such as IsraAID and many more, are pursuing projects to provide services and materials for refugees throughout their journey and once they've resettled. And lastly, in terms of US and the US advocacy that can be done, the United States policies that they've issued about refugee resettlement can be much improved. There are many movements within NGOs and other organizations to push the United States to accept 100,000 Syrian refugees, far beyond the 10,000 it's committed to this year, and which it's demonstrated it's struggling to reach its commitments. There are many, many improvements that the United States system can pursue, including increasing personnel within the United States Customs and Immigration Services and Department of Homeland Security that would allow for quicker and more efficient processing of refugee resettlement. Lastly, we cannot ignore the contributing causes to the refugee crisis. The Syrian conflict continues on, and we need to make sure that we are pressuring our elected officials to do all that they can to bring an end to this conflict and, in turn, bring an end to the refugee crisis. Thank you.
The Greek island of Lesbos, a quiet vacation spot where tourists relax and local children play in peace. But on the other side of the island, a very different scene is unfolding. Every day, thousands of refugees arrive on this shore. Most are fleeing the Syrian civil war, hoping to resettle in Europe.
We see babies which are only a few days old people at the age of 90, 95 even. And we get mainly people from Syria, also from Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran.
Waiting to help them on the beaches of Greece are the last people the Syrians might expect. Volunteers from Israel.
My name is Tali Shaltiel. I'm here with IsraAID, an Israeli-based NGO.
My name is Majida Kardosh. I'm here as a medical team. I work as a nurse.
My name is Iris Adler. I live in Tel Aviv. I just finished med school in Tel Aviv University. I came here through IsraAID to be on the coast as a doctor.
My name is Manal Shhadi. I'm from Nazareth, and I'm the team lead of IsraAID in Greece.
The IsraAID team is a mix of doctors and nurses, both Arab and Jewish.
I am a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Arabic is my mother tongue. I'm also Christian, so I'm a minority inside of a minority inside of Israel. Being aware of my history, my background, where I come from, the history that my people went through, this is something that appeals to me, and I can help refugees. So this is my job, and this is what I should be doing.
Our job here is to receive the boats of the refugees that are coming from the Turkish side to the Greek side. There are many, many volunteers on the beach, not many medical teams.
On the line from the Turkish side, they're going through a lot of problems. Their smugglers there are asking them to pay between $1,000 to $5,000 per person. A lot of time they're just shoving them into boats that should fit 50 people, but there are 150 people on the boat. They just leave them midway through the sea and they tell them, you find your own way to Greece, we're not responsible on you. Or they fill like half a tank of gas and they just leave them in the middle of the sea.
What we do is go to Hind Point with binoculars, searching and scanning the water, and you start looking for this black with orange dots in the view. And then it comes nearer and you start seeing the rubber boat and all the people on it. It's like 1, 2, 3, it begins. It's a few minutes of chaos. Taking off the babies, people screaming, shouting, helping them, you know. A lot of them don't know how to swim, they're afraid from the water.
Here's the point that we start doing a triage, a very fast, you know, by hearing, they're talking, looking at the refugees, so we can see who is in need of medical help. And I start shouting, "Min baddu doctor," who need a doctor in Arabic. And so this is the time that we start giving treatment.
I've treated a 14-year-old Afghani guy that was unconscious. If he didn't receive aggressive treatment on the shore, on the spot, he might have not made it.
After that, we start giving them food and water, warm clothes, something to eat, to drink, because some of them didn't have any water or food for like 1 or 2 days. After that, I take the map. We have a map that we translate on it in Arabic, explain to them what is the next step. You know, they don't know where they are, okay? So the first thing that I tell them that they are in Lesbos island in Greece, because some of them, they had like no idea where they are. Most of them, they had nothing. They just come with their clothes only because they had to throw their bags in the sea, or smugglers took their bags and threw in the sea.
After a couple of days of assessing the field, we understood that the biggest need is a way to communicate with the refugees who come. So we brought a team from Israel, which is Arab-speaking, and the effect was amazing.
Hearing your language is very important to them, and then getting the instructions where to go, what to do next, what are the next steps, because they have a lot of uncertainty.
And although Israel and Syria are technically at war, none of that matters here on the beach.
Usually when they get to the beach, they're just happy to see people waiting for them, giving them help and food and clothes and medical treatment if they need. Sometimes they realize who we are, and they're just happy to see us, and they hug us and kiss us, and it's very exciting.
We get lovely, warming reactions of hugs and, you know, men kissing me like I'm their daughter, you know, on the forehead, saying thank you, saying that I would never have thought that I'm going to receive treatment or be able to speak from an Israeli doctor or share my story with an Israeli who will empathize with what I've been through. This guy, he had, I think, a sprained ankle, and he put some bandage, and I wanted to take out of my bag some medicine to ease the pain, a painkiller. And while I'm looking in my bag, this guy asked Majda in Arabic, "Where am I from? Like, where is she from? Where is she from?" And she was telling to him, "What does it matter? You need help now. She's here to give it to you. Why are you focusing on that?" And we continued with our work and whatever we were doing at the time. And a few minutes afterwards, he comes to me with a package of biscuits that he brought from Turkey for the journey. You know, giving me something from the nothing that he have, and apologizing for not respecting me or questioning me, and, you know, just giving me, you know, a thanks for being there.
IsraAID is a non-political organization. What they do is help people in a disaster situation. And this is what I'm doing. And this is what they teach me at nursing school, to treat a human, no matter what he is, which religion he have, which color he is, what language he talks.
To see a 60-year-old Arab man burst into tears on the shore, something that you don't see every day. So being able to give a hand, give a hug, give water, medical treatment, yeah, it's a privilege.
Offshore, IsraAID doctors also provide trauma counseling for families in refugee camps.
We start with the communication thing, talking Arabic, or put only hand on his or her shoulder, try to make them feel better, as much as we can.
In my country, in Syria, it's coming very hard and there is no future for anyone. Yesterday, I have coming here with a plastic boat. I will say they are amazing people, and I'm really thanks everyone working with these people. They are really helping us and helping a lot of families here and children.
Because we come from a country that a lot of people suffer trauma because of the conflict and what's happening, so we have a lot of experience how to deal with trauma, how to deal with the conflict. And this is a knowledge that we need to pass to other people, to other countries, if we can help make their suffering less, or to help support them, or to show them a different way. And I think this is our duty.
These people come and they automatically get this title. They are refugees fleeing to Europe. But at the end of the day, they're just humans, the families. They had honorable jobs, fulfilling life in the countries that they're coming from. And suddenly they come here and they're treated and looked as refugees when they're human beings as me and you. And for me, when I meet those people, this is what I'm trying to give them, that feeling that I respect them, I feel them, I connect to them in the most human level. I'm not above them or same, it's just now they're on that side of the coin. Tomorrow it might be me and I will need their help. I was thinking about that 60 years ago, it was the Jewish people in Europe during the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, making their journey to Israel or for different countries and seeking for a safe home. We're always saying, never again. When you see something difficult, for me, it's looking at my part. What's my responsibility? This is what we try to do, We're coming as humans, meeting other human beings, and this is how changes starts, little.
They are very lovely. They are give me hope to my future. They are really cool people.
I think that helping other people is a very important thing in the Jewish tradition. We can't just sit back and watch what's going on. We have to come and do the best we can, and even if we touched few people's life, I think that's a lot.
We wanted to give you a bit of a background on who we are, what it means for a disaster that's not a different disaster, what we normally do on a day-to-day, and how we basically bring Israeli innovation and Israeli know-how to the world when they need it. So we are an Israeli nonprofit, non-governmental, and apolitical organization. We were founded in 2001. And throughout the past 15 years, we've operated in 34 countries. Today, we are in 19 countries around the world. So actually, we were joking about this today, that we always mentioned 18 countries, but about 2 weeks ago, there's a very strong cyclone that hit Fiji. And so we just sent a team there, and that's the 19th country that we're currently operating in. And so the idea is for us to take all the things that Israel has learned over the last 65 odd years and to share them with the whole world as they need them. This is a picture of what a disaster looks like. This is from Japan in 2011, the earthquake and tsunami that absolutely devastated the area. And this is kind of our bread and butter. This is where we arrive normally, and we start helping in different ways. Here is a picture now from Nepal, most recently. And this is one of the first things that we do. So when a disaster happens, we take some of our teams of professionals and aid workers, we get on a plane, and we try and help. This is an example of our search and rescue team arriving in Nepal. They came straight off the plane. Yotam was actually there leading them at the same time. And they were the last team to actually find someone alive. 5 days after the disaster occurred, after 130 hours of hard work, they managed to pull someone alive from underneath this person here. Another example is, for instance, here in Burma. During last summer, there was a lot of flooding there, and there were communities that were completely cut off. There was no more land for miles and miles.
and they had no more access to food, no more access to water. And so here, this is our team arriving in the middle of what used to be a village. Underneath here, there's a village. And arriving with boats and trying to find a way to get the community together so that we could distribute water and hygiene kits and soap and try and help them. So that's what we do when we arrive. When we arrive in a disaster, our goal is to try and save lives. Our goal is to try and make sure that the immediate needs are taken care of. But very quickly, sort of like the age-old proverb that goes, don't give someone a fish, teach him how to fish, our idea is as quickly as possible to start working with governments, with organizations, to try and help think about what will happen once the news leave, once the organizations move to the next crisis, and they're left to deal with reconstruction. So here's an example from South Sudan, where we've been working since the country gained independence, and in the beginning we arrived again with food and other basic necessities, but very quickly we moved to working to fight probably one of the worst things that's happening in South Sudan today, which is the rampant gender-based violence and child trafficking that happens there. And so working together with, this is on the left, a government social worker, and on the right, a police officer, and they didn't used to really speak because they have as a new country, they had no understanding really work on these issues. Many of the police often, unfortunately, were viewed as perpetrators of the crimes, and here they're working together in a conference to explain to each other how to work so they know how to reach out to a victim. And this is something where we've been working from the lowest level with community workers trying to raise awareness to what it means, all the way to trying to finally put people behind bars for what they've done. And it might not sound like a lot, but in the last couple of years, there have been the first 15 or 20 cases that have been taken to trial and people have been found guilty in South Sudan, and that for us is no small feat. It's far from what it should be. The country has suffered about 50 years of war, but it's a beginning. This is Haiti. Everyone remembers what happened in 2010. We arrived as well with the same search and rescue teams, medical doctors, and then we moved to trying to think about what happens tomorrow. So we went to the sources, we went to villages, and started to work here. This is agriculture, working together with the communities to help them increase their yield and create income. Funny enough, this little boy here, one of the reasons why we choose this picture, in any situation there are those that learn, there are those that have more trouble with it, but this little boy here, he wasn't part of any of the training, he was a bit young for it, but he used to watch from the side. And when everyone else went home and tried to put together their kits and tried to understand how to plant and all that, so he then walked and he took the little pieces of leftover pipe and took a bucket, and in the end, he had the nicest lettuce, he made the most money, and then he bought seeds with it, not a toy or anything like that, and today he's one of the best farmers in the village. Here in Kenya, where we work, Kenya and in Uganda, where we are creating the next generation of both refugees and host community people that understand hygiene, sanitation, and how to work as water technicians. And so in essence, that kind of brings us to this crisis. You heard a lot from Shoshana in very great detail about exactly what's going on and what makes this such a problematic crisis. And as she mentioned, the crisis happened in the beginning of 2013 is when things started to warm up. And that's when we started to work. So we looked at it as a normal crisis, something we're used to. We looked at the situation in Jordan, and we said, okay, we have to do something. So we sent it in the beginning to Jordan, where we started to work both in giving out aid and in starting to help train some of the locals there, some of the Jordanians and the Syrian volunteers from the camps on how to work, especially with children. Again, like Shoshana mentioned, education is a very big challenge in these situations, and even when there are schools, children end up being very idle often. It's a very sterile environment. They have no access to proper education or even entertainment, and so their development is hampered. We also work in Iraq as well, where we arrived and we said, okay, once ISIS arrived, that completely changed everything, and we were having an enormous amount of displaced people within Iraq, so we started to do the same thing, to distribute aid, to work in schools, to help create a link between schooling and living, where children could take what they learned in school and actually apply it to the day-to-day in the camp. And then that's when we started to discover things that made this crisis so different. First of all, the numbers started to be enormous. Today, as Shoshana mentioned, more than 60% of Syrians are no longer in their homes, whether they're displaced within Syria or in the countries around. And as we started to speak with people, we discovered also the Yazidis. We started discovering the atrocities that ISIS was committing throughout the area. We discovered here this is a family of Yazidis living in a camp in northern Iraq, and they had lost their daughter. She was now a slave of different sorts for ISIS, and we started to see more and more of these stories, and as we started to provide treatment, all of a sudden that's when the European crisis began in huge numbers. And so we said, okay, this is something different. We need to send teams to the beach in Greece and try and deal with whatever comes. And to introduce us through this, I'll invite back Yotam to speak to us about our entire response with the European crisis starting in Greece.
So Greece, you've seen the images on the movie. The guy standing there in the very heroic position, his name is Malek, and he's actually a Muslim Bedouin from Israel, a nurse, who's been working with us now, I think, almost for 6 months. He's been back and forth. Originally, he came for a few weeks to volunteer. He loved the organization, he loved the work, and he realized he could really make a difference, so he kept on coming back. He's now in Israel, but he's going back, I think, next week to Lesbos. That picture, me with the Syrian baby, was taken, I think, last December in one of my previous visits. And again, I mean, it's an unbelievable scene. I mean, also, you were speaking before, some of you, about being, a son, a daughter of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents are actually from Hungary. My grandmother passed away a few years ago, but my grandfather is still alive. And I remember when I was showing him this picture, he was so moved because it really reminded him, a lot of the experience that he went through. And again, we're not trying to compare anything to the Holocaust or to atrocities of the Nazi regime, but these images, these thousands of refugees fleeing, is just something that's really hard to describe in words. That's a whole different phenomenon that we had and that we've seen there, which is quite interesting. That's Susan Sarandon with me. She joined our team for 3 days. To do hands-on work in Lesbos, and we actually ended up spending Christmas together on the beach. And what we really liked about working with her is that she was able to spread the word, not only about the importance of helping and the humanitarian situation of refugees, but she also wrote articles and blog in the Huffington Post about our work, about Israelis, Jews, and Arabs working together, and specifically about the Yazidi that Vonnie mentioned before, which is a group that we're very focused on. Now, actually, I'd like to introduce another special guest. Mona was mentioning her before in the movie. Dr. Iris Adler was originally not supposed to be here, but she heard about this event, so we were happy to have her here. And I want her to share one particular unbelievable story that she had too. So, Iris.
The movie just brought me back to Lesbos. It has been a few months, 2.5 months since I got back, so forgive me if I'm a bit excited. So as you've seen in the movie, we were helping so many people, babies, children, women, old people, handicapped, and all of them touched me. Each and every one of them touched me. This is a very special story that we would like to share, and this is actually a happy story, a point of light in the middle of all the tragedies that we've seen there. And even that same day in the morning, there was a funeral of a baby, 8 months old baby that passed away a few days earlier. We tried to resuscitate him. We could not help. And on the same day of the burial, a few hours later, we received a call that there is a pregnant woman that needs us. So I asked, how far along is she? Because we used to get many calls of women in for a week. And then the volunteer screamed, I can see the head. So we realized that we really need to hurry up. It was pretty hard finding them. As you can see, she delivered right on the rocks, right on the water. Her name is Hanan. She's 22 years old from Syria. She was pushed on the boat in labor. Her water broke inside the boat. And when she got to the rocks, immediately started the delivery. When we got there, the baby was already out. There was shoelace on the umbilical cord. We came there, we made sure that the baby and that the mother are okay. We treated them. We finished the delivery, we cut the umbilical cord, we took the placenta out. And I have to say that it's probably a cliche, but it was one of the most exciting moments of my life, because basically when we got there, we were the first people who could speak her language. To speak to her in Arabic, to tell her that everything is okay, that the baby is okay. And then she asked us, what is it? Is it a boy or a girl? They didn't even show me the baby. So actually they caught me here asking the people, is it a boy or a girl? And when Malek, the nurse you saw before, told her, you have a beautiful baby boy, she started crying because she realized that her baby was born safe on European land, and we all started crying with her. It was very emotional, and I have to admit, a bit scary for me as a doctor, because I knew that I have at least 2 hours before I could get her to the hospital because of lack of ambulances on the island. So I was very happy that we had no complications. When we got to the hospital, we were happy that both of them were healthy and okay, and we're still in touch with them. You can see little Ahmed and his brother. The moment they got to Germany, they sent me a WhatsApp message with a picture to thank us again and to let us know that they're safe. We're still in touch with them. We're helping them still in Germany. And I have to say that I feel blessed that I could be there for them, could be a part of their journey, and to be able to help them in such an important moment in their life. Thank you.
Wow.
My question is, in Greece, were you invited? Did the Greek government invite you there? Do the Greek people want you there? Is there any backlash to you being there? And why is it you doing this and not the Greeks?
Thank you. I think, as I shown before, the Greeks are very happy to have us there. First of all, Greece in general is a very good friend of Israel, but also the Greeks are completely overwhelmed. I mean, they had a financial crisis before the refugee crisis, and they're completely overwhelmed. In Lesbos, we work very closely with the mayor office, and he, in the international media and all over the place, from the very start of this crisis, of, let's say, this huge mass of refugees, he appealed for international support, not only from Israel, from all over. And we were one of the very first organizations to be there on the ground. And then this work later was recognized by the Prime Minister of Greece, as I showed in Israel. Recently, just a few days ago, I got a phone call from another mayor on another island, Chios, who's also suffering a lot, and he was actually complaining. He was telling me, it's not fair that all of the support is going for Lesbos. We need you here as well. So, our capacity is also limited. But in Greece and also in Germany, we're very, very welcome. And also in Kurdistan, actually, in Iraq, by the Kurdish local government. Although there are security concerns, but we're very, very welcome there as well.
Thank you. Your work is inspiring, and thank you. On behalf of not just those people, on behalf of all of us. I'd like to ask you a somewhat different question, though, because your work in these crises and for refugees is critical. It saves lives. Some of your work based on South Sudan and Kenya seems to deal with internally displaced people. And there are twice as many internally displaced people in the world, 40 million, than there are refugees. What have you learned about what really should be done with respect to IDP communities, which are so often forgotten and ignored?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it's a very important and difficult issue. A lot is being done with IDPs. We tend to forget that, just to put in perspective, that a lot of these communities, once upon a time when nobody opened camps to try to help them, as limited as they may be, once upon a time those people didn't make it. And so today, having that many refugees is and internally displaced people is a very difficult and challenging thing, and the situation unfortunately is not necessarily getting better, but once upon a time the situation also would have been far worse. One of the biggest challenges with internally displaced people is very similar to refugees. It's the concept of being in an area where your basic needs are being taken care of. Let's say Kenya, as you mentioned. Kenya has two very large refugee camps. One of them is the largest in the world. It's called Dadaab. It today has 650,000 people. And the other is a smaller one of Kakuma on the border of South Sudan that has about 200,000 people today. These are usually in very difficult locations, remote locations. And so a camp is built and people are put there. But one of the biggest challenges is that it's a state of consciousness that you get into. Your basic needs are taken care of. Someone gives you, once a week your number is called and you show up and get your bottle of oil and some maize powder and you go home and you eat that. But it's very hard to fathom that you might actually be stuck there for a long time. You know, the average time that a refugee spends in a camp like Kakuma is 20 years. So someone that's 25 arrived at 5 and all they know is this camp. They have a school there, but there's nothing else. There are no trees usually. There's no entertainment. There's nothing to keep them alive or developing. There are even cases of men, more than women, because even in these situations, unfortunately, women end up having a lot of work at home. But men that don't have a job because they can't work, there are actually cases, there's a phenomenon of them losing consciousness in daylight and walking out of the camp and only coming 2 hours later when they're already too far to be reached. So there's a real challenge, and people don't realize that enough. When we went to camps, I remember in Kurdistan, asking a family that had already been there for 6 months, and I came back after 6 months and said, so now that you're no longer in a little tent, but you're in a slightly better, cardboard and tin home, why not make a window? And they said, nah, we'll leave tomorrow. We'll be there, we'll be home in a month, not understanding that they could be here for a long time. And so the first thing that needs to be done to address this is to not make being internally displaced or a refugee something that is only dealt with for the bare minimum. We're talking about just dealing with people's survival, but trying to create opportunities for people to develop as individuals and to grow, because that's the basis of who we are. And I think that that's really what we try and do in these places.
The people with whom we engage are mostly interested in Syrian refugees, so give me the numbers. How many people in IsraAID are there that are on the shores and pulling in people from the boats? And how many non-IsraAID people do that?
Okay, I'll try to answer. So, as mentioned, we currently work in 5 different countries. So altogether, for the refugee crisis, since last September, where we started, I think we had about 60 IsraAID volunteers, Jews and Arabs in Greece. In Germany, we have a small team. We just started there of 4 people on the ground, but working with the large Jewish community in Berlin. In Kurdistan, the way it works is that we have a permanent local team there, and then Voni and some other people from our team are coming on every other month. And that works the same in Jordan, because it's just next to Israel, so we send a team almost on a monthly basis. So I would say that in total, for the Syrian refugee crisis, we had about 100 to 120 people involved so far in the last year. I think if you really think about the numbers here, the most interesting thing is in Lesbos, because as seen in the movie, about 2,000 people are still coming every day. And when Iris was there, actually October, November, in the peak of the crisis, we had 7,000 people arriving every day. So these, we were able to deal with a lot of people. Not all of them we were able to deliver babies and stuff like that, but all of them had some sort of encounter with us, received some kind of relief or medical support from us. So I think these numbers are really the interesting ones, but of course it's more challenging now in Germany, where people are more settled, and we work in these huge refugee homes, and I don't want to paint a very pink picture. It's not like all of them are big Israel supporters. It's not like all of them love the fact that we're Jews and Israelis, but the beginning of the process, where we start in Iraq, Kurdistan, Jordan, then Greece, then Germany, together with the Jewish community, we really see a change. One of the, I don't know if answer your question, but one of the things that we've seen is a lot of Syrian refugees who tell us that really changed their perspective about Israel. I think you saw it in the movie, but for me, one of the Syrian engineers that I met on the shore, who spoke fluent English, he told me, my worst enemy became my biggest supporter. And the people who are supposed to protect me back home are now chasing me away. And that really helped me understand the opportunity that we have here to build bridges between people. Because, you know, when you think about it, the Syrian refugees, all of them are in identity crisis. You know, their government slaughter them. Some of their extreme religious leaders slaughter them. Then Israelis are helping them. It's a very confusing experience. But again, an amazing opportunity to change people's mindset.
I have a two-part question. First of all, I'm not really clear who your sponsoring agency or where your finances come from, and to what extent are you covered or are you connected with any Israeli governmental agencies, or you operate purely as an independent charity? That's one. Two, speaking to a number of Israelis about the refugee crisis, it has been my impression, or what I've heard from many people in high positions, about Israel's attitude towards, you know, the refugee crisis in Israel. Now, sure, what you guys are doing wonderful in terms of what's already been said, heroic work there on the shores of Lesbos. But how does this connect with what is the general attitude towards Israel, towards refugees, the country's neighboring countries? From what I understand, they won't accept refugees. I've heard that some agencies, hospitals accept refugees and treat them, but send them back immediately. They won't allow them admission into Israel. So there's a kind of conflict here in terms of what I say, the ambivalence of Israel towards the refugee problem. You go outside, you're helping, but Israel itself seems very threatened by this refugee problem. I was wondering if you can enlarge your statements in terms of what does Israel as a country do in terms of helping the refugee problems in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you for your question. So for the first part, which kind of answers a little bit of the second part, we're a completely independent nonprofit in every way. As it goes the same in the US, in Israel, we have our status, we do what we believe is right. We are completely apolitical, meaning that we don't promote nor do we condemn the positions of the Israeli government in any way. We're here to showcase and share what it means for us to be Israeli and the expertise that it brings. Most of our funders today are quite diverse. About a third of our funding today, an increasing number of our funds are coming from UN agencies. So getting to the point where they would recognize an Israeli organization as being a leader in different fields has taken us a very long time, and we're very proud that places like South Sudan and others, and even in Greece, we are strongly coordinating and partnering with the UNHCR, UNICEF, other organizations. Some of it is, and a lot of the basis of what we did started with organizations such as AJC, Jewish communities throughout North America and the world that understood and felt the responsibility and that had the generosity to support our efforts. And increasingly private individuals, international organizations, Save the Children or other ones, as well as, of course, different other faith groups, interfaith group, and so forth. So we've had some of that. Our connection to the Israeli government is one of communication. We communicate on a case-by-case situation a lot with different embassies, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They know what we're doing. They're in discussion. Sometimes the partnership goes further than that, but we stay at that level. Regarding the refugee situation in Israel, I think that that's something that's extraordinarily complicated. There are so many issues involved for Israel, both security, demographics. There are so many different issues I wouldn't even know individually how to start answering, even on a personal level, of what I believe on that, much less an organizational level. That's why I think for us, as a non-governmental organization, we focus on trying to see where we can help most, also without endangering the lives of the people that we're trying to help, and without having whatever we do be a political statement. And so in essence, it's the best place for us to work at this point is, of course, working with the refugees and the asylum seekers as they leave the entire area there. We're not a security agency. We're not here to try and take the place of the IDF or something like that. They know what they're doing. And Israel has been involved in certain cases a lot of treating them. The IDF has done a lot of treating of people once they've arrived to the border and so forth. So Right? And Iris has actually a very interesting story that she'll share about that.
Thank you. So one day I saw a man walking, and he was wounded in his leg. So I stopped him and I asked him if he needs any help. And then he looked at me, he looked at my shirt. He saw as you saw, our sign is with the Israeli flag. And he asked to move to the side because he didn't want to speak when other people are hearing. And Malek was translating because I'm not speaking Arabic, unfortunately. And he actually was very moved that we're from Israel, because he told me that he was fighting against the Assad regime in the Golan Heights 3.5 years ago. He was severely wounded, and he went to the Israeli border. The IDF picked him up, took him to Rambam in Haifa, and he was operated in his leg, and his life was saved. And he actually he told me it's unbelievable that I was saved once in Israel, and now I'm coming to Europe, and again, I meet the first person I meet is Israeli. And it might be one story, but I can tell, like, I work in Israeli hospitals. We see these people all the time. It might not be in the news, you might not hear about it, but people from Syria and from all the other countries as well, Palestinians are treated in Israeli hospitals all the time. So I hope it answers a little bit your question.
Thank you, Congregation Emanu-El, also for hosting this and hosting us. We really appreciate it, and thank you all. Appreciate it.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.